Today, we're going to Andrews, New Mexico. It's a ghost town, so we're digging into mines of the Hillsboro Mining District, Volume 5, and we're going to find out what life was really like in this Wild West mining town.
You know, it's really amazing how much we can learn about a place just from, the rocks beneath our feet. And Andrews is in this landscape that's shaped by these volcanic flows.
Yeah.
Basically, these are layers of cooled lava. So you can imagine these dramatic gray slopes, and they're studded with these really eye-catching crystals. It's a really rugged setting, perfect for hiding veins of precious ore.
Okay, so picture this. You're a prospector in the late 1800s. You've heard rumors of gold and you're drawn to this area. You arrive in Andrews and you find a town that's surprisingly built up. And we're not just talking tents and saloons. There's a hotel, a store, stables, and a really swanky bunkhouse for the miners.
And this is where things get really interesting. The El Oro mine, which means the gold in Spanish was supposed to be Andrews' golden ticket. But get this, by 1933, it had only produced about $285,000 worth of ore. That's not a lot considering the town's fancy amenities.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Was the El Oro a legitimate success story, or was it some kind of clever scheme to attract investors?
It's almost like they built this facade of prosperity to hide the fact that the mine wasn't as productive as they'd hoped.
Yeah, that's a great point. It wasn't uncommon for mining towns to embellish their success to lure in eager investors. You hear these stories of a bustling town with modern conveniences in the middle of the Wild West. It's really easy to get caught up in all the excitement and overlook the potential risks.
It's like a Wild West version of fake it till you make it, but with much higher stakes. And speaking of high stakes, the town itself is named after a real person, William Henry Andrews. And he sounds like quite a character. Oh, he was. So imagine this. He starts his career in Pennsylvania, loses an election, and decides, hey, I'm going to head west. He ends up in New Mexico and quickly climbs the political ladder. First, he served on the Territorial Council, which was basically the governing body for New Mexico before it became a state. And then he became a delegate to Congress, representing New Mexico and Washington.
So basically, he went from losing an election in Pennsylvania to becoming a major player in New Mexican politics. Talk about a career change. And he even had his sights set on a Senate seat when New Mexico finally achieved statehood. But some powerful figures like Thomas B. Catron and Albert B. Fall ended up blocking his path.
Now, Catron was this prominent lawyer and politician. Think of him as the big man of New Mexico law at the time.
Yeah.
And Fall, well, he went on to become a U.S. Senator and Secretary of the Interior, though his career was later tarnished by scandal. But back then, they were both major players in New Mexico politics.
So we've got these three ambitious men, all vying for power in this rapidly changing territory. It's like a political drama set against the backdrop of the Wild West. But let's get back to Andrews, the town. We get these amazing glimpses into daily life there from a 1900 report. It mentions a hotel bustling with guests, a well-stocked store, and a corral big enough for 30 horses. But the bunkhouse is what really caught my attention.
It's incredible, right? This wasn't just some rough shack. It had iron bedsteads, mattresses, pillows, and even a reading room with periodicals. The miners paid a weekly fee for janitorial services and subscriptions. It was practically a hotel.
This wasn't the rough and tumble mining life we see in the movies. And get this, they were planning to build a schoolhouse and an electric plant. We're talking 400 incandescent lights and 10 arc lights illuminating this little town in the New Mexico wilderness. It's almost like they were trying to create this little oasis of civilization in the middle of nowhere.
It definitely shows how invested they were in making Andrews a thriving community. And speaking of thriving, no Wild West town is complete without a few secrets, right?
Oh, I'm all ears. Spill the tea.
Well, there are rumors that the Hotel Dance Hall just across from the mine workings was a bit more than a place for entertainment during Prohibition. People say it might have been operating as a speakeasy.
A speakeasy in a tiny mining town. It makes you wonder what sorts of deals were being struck over illegal drinks in that dimly lit dance hall.
Yeah, it's fun to imagine, isn't it? The source even jokes about the need for a fast getaway car since the sheriff could be spotted coming from miles away.
That's hilarious. It's those little details that make history come alive. So we've got lavish spending, a potentially fraudulent mine, an ambitious founder, a surprisingly swanky bunkhouse, and a possible speakeasy. It seems like Andrews had it all. But what happened? How did this bustling town end up a ghost town?
Well, let's fast forward a few decades to the 1930s. A geologist named Harley visited Andrews and wasn't exactly impressed with what he found.
Harley? Is that the same Harley from the famous Bulletin 10? The one who mapped out so many of the mines in this region?
That's the one. He found that the El Oro mine shafts were constantly flooding, requiring repeated dewatering. That's a major problem for any mine. but especially one that's supposed to be a major operation.
And remember how we were talking about whether the El Oro was a genuine success or not? Well, Hartley was skeptical. He thought the grand investments were ill-advised, given the limited amount of ore they were actually extracting.
This raises so many questions. Were people blinded by the allure of gold? Was it a case of overly optimistic projections? Or was there something more deliberate at play?
This ghost town is just full of surprises.
It really is. And remember, geologist Hartley's assessment of the El Oro mine. He really thought those grand investments that we talked about earlier were like ill-advised. Just consider how limited the mine's output actually was.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if there was more to the story, you know?
Yeah, so if the mine wasn't as successful as they were making it seem, why go through all that trouble of building up this really elaborate town? What was the point?
Well, just imagine you're an investor back then. News travels slow, right? And all you hear are these stories about this bustling mining town with all the modern conveniences. So you might be tempted to just jump right in without really looking too closely at the actual production figures.
Oh, so they were banking on the allure of the Wild West and the dream of striking it rich to override any potential skepticism.
Exactly. And it's not that there wasn't any gold being found. It just might not have been at the levels that they were suggesting. This kind of speculation and exaggeration was really common during mining booms.
It's a historical case of don't believe everything you hear. It makes you realize just how powerful those stories we tell ourselves can be, especially when there's a chance of striking it rich.
Absolutely. And that's what makes the story of Andrews so fascinating. It reminds us that history is more than just dates and facts. It's about the people, their motivations, and the stories that they tell.
What about the everyday people of Andrews? What was their experience like?
That's a really great question. We've talked about that surprisingly comfortable bunkhouse.
Yeah.
But what else can we learn about life in Andrews?
Well, the 1900 report that we've been referencing paints a picture of a town that was really trying to create a sense of community and normalcy despite its remote location and the, boom or bust nature of mining.
Right. And remember, their plans for a schoolhouse, church, and an electric plant. Those weren't just investments in infrastructure. They were investments in the future of the town and its people.
It's like they were trying to build more than just a mining town. They were trying to build a home.
It's easy to imagine the excitement and hope that those early residents must have felt. Families arriving in this really remote town, children playing in the shadow of the mine, the clatter of wagons and the sound of music drifting from the dance hall.
It sounds like this mix of frontier grit and a yearning for better life. And somewhere in the midst of it all, you have this potential speakeasy operating under the noses of the law. It's amazing to think about how all of these different layers of life coexisted in a place like Andrews.
It really is. And it makes you wonder what stories those crumbling walls could tell if they could speak. What were the conversations like at the dinner table? What were their dreams and aspirations? What did they think about the mine and the men who ran it?
These are all questions that we can only really speculate about, but it's those personal stories that bring history to life. They remind us that even in a ghost town, there were once people who lived, loved, and dreamed.
Exactly. And sometimes it's those everyday details that help us connect with the past in a really meaningful way.
Well said. We're wrapping up our little journey through the ghost town of Andrews, New Mexico, and I have to say this has been one wild ride.
It really has been. We've uncovered so much about this seemingly forgotten town, from that possible mining scheme to the surprisingly comfortable lives of the miners, and of course the ambitious political journey of the town's namesake, William Henry Andrews.